Over the years, there have been many Supermen brought to the big and small screen, most of which that are still fondly remembered to this day. They're instant icons, immediately immortalized by a red cape. Yet amongst those men that fly, stands one that didn't wear the cape, and by some accounts, refused to wear the cape. It was a show that followed the hero that we all know and love, before he became the hero that we all know and love. In some ways, its prequel nature was actually its biggest strength, because its lack of spandex-clad superheroes kind of made it easily digestible to an outside audience. You didn't need to be a Superman fan to like Smallville. You didn't need to be a superhero fan to like Smallville. As a matter of fact, a lot of the people that I grew up with became fans of the hero by becoming fans of this show, with this acting as their introduction to the last son of Krypton.
It was a compelling idea. You know, it's a story before Clark Kent becomes Superman. It's a story before the story.
Yeah, you didn't need to know that he would go on to become Superman to enjoy the show.
Smallville was a unique take on the Superman character and the surrounding mythos. The show was set during the character's developmental years, with audiences following the Superboy, who would someday go on to become Superman. 10 full seasons set before the Red Blue Boy Scout ever donned the cape. A show that shows the character taking his first few steps before he'd learned to fly. This series was an instant classic, making a great first impression with fans, and soon-to-be fans alike. And in my personal opinion, the first few seasons of the show was where it truly thrived. The early days of the early days. And that's why today, I'm going to be taking a look back at where it all began. Season 1.
They just put all of Smallville on Netflix. But Abby, promise me you'll watch from the beginning, okay? It really builds.
The first season followed Superman and friends through their freshman year of high school, despite the fact that most, if not all of the actors, looked like they'd been out of high school for at least 3 to 5 years. Like most people his age, Clark is growing and developing. Unlike most people his age, his growing pains come with unimaginable power. And since this Superman is de-aged, he is essentially depowered, to a degree. In the beginning, he's watered down to just his basics. He's super fast, he's super strong, and super endurable. But everything else slowly develops over time, with him gaining abilities like X-ray vision and super hearing throughout the first season. Unfortunately, these are all gifts that don't necessarily come with an instruction guide, causing Clark to try to figure it out on his own. Sure, his parents try to lend him a helping hand and guide him down the right direction, but realistically, they're just as in the dark as he is. Probably even more so, actually. This change worked wonders, as creatively it stops Clark from feeling too strong in any and every circumstance. It also subtly alerts audiences that this isn't exactly the Superman they know and love. Not yet, anyway. He may have had power that most couldn't even dream of, but he was still a few tomorrows away from being the Man of Tomorrow. It also meant that when Clark finally got to use these powers, they were in major moments that held weight and meant something to fans. Powering Clark down with the promise of building him back up gave audiences something to look forward to. And I'll be honest, it's also kind of endearing to see Clark use his powers for more mundane things from time to time. Like using his super speed to clean up the house before his parents get home. I think these actions really emphasize just how human Clark is. You know, despite him not actually being a human. And while the character is usually completely selfless, it doesn't mean that he can't be a little bit selfish from time to time, should no one else be there for their wants and needs to take precedent. And I think these small ways in which he wielded his abilities are very similar to how anyone his age would, had they had them. Though in this telling of the tale, he's far from the only Smallville resident with otherworldly talents. The first season of the show really showcases the fallout of the Meteor shower. The same cosmic storm that brought Kal-El to Earth wound up taking lives and affecting so many others. It sent a shockwave through Smallville and created a ripple effect that this small town is still feeling over a decade later. There are many instances of people being infected by fragments of the leftover meteorite in a variety of ways, creating what this series has so affectionately dubbed Meteor Freaks, which may actually just be one of this show's greatest original inventions, Which is saying something because they have many. I think Smallville very much is like Batman the Animated Series in the sense that it was a TV series inspired by the comics that went on to inspire and influence future comics. There are a couple of strong additions that start off in Smallville and have made their way to other Superman media. I'll get to them in a little bit. Not only did the inclusion of a Freak of the Week give the Someday Super a whole host of new threats to face, not only did it give the writers a chance to tell new stories with all new characters, but it also amplified the impact that Superman had on society. And in a way, I think that kind of adds to his story, and more importantly, his mission. Clark feels even more of an obligation to stop these overpowered teens, because in his own head, he's in part at fault for the damage that they do. What brought him here made them the way that they are. He carries such guilt over something he truly had no control over, but still something he can't help but feel responsible for. A lot of these early episodes are centered around those genetically corrupted by the space rocks. It's pretty much the whole premise of the plot in the first season. Although Smallville was a contemporary take on the character 20 years ago now, it doesn't feel horribly outdated, and I still think a lot of it holds up pretty well, all things considered. You know, CGI crops aside, because, yeah, a lot of that stuff is horribly and laughably outdated. But then again, this was TV-level CGI in the early 2000s, so if there was ever a time to wear your rose-tinted glasses, some of these effects don't stand the test of time. But the show itself and the effect it had on viewers certainly do. A lot of that, I feel, has to do with the casting, because a lot of these portrayals are as close to perfect as you can get. Some of which, I would even go so far as to say, are the definitive version of these characters on screen. I know that's a pretty bold statement to make, but I stand by it. There's a lot to discuss when talking about what makes this show so great. But first and foremost, like I said, it really is the cast. There is not a bad performance amongst the original ensemble. Not one person feels out of place. Everyone just feels made for the part that they're playing.
The relationship I had with you, with Schneider, there were no lazy actors on that show.
Characters would range from accurate adaptations, to interesting reimaginings, to worthwhile original inclusions. Despite not wearing the suit or going by the name, Tom Welling embodies Superman. This Clark approaches life with the same do-gooder energy that his comic counterpart does. He's well-meaning and good-natured, sometimes to a fault. Clark just comes off as a genuinely good guy, and he does so in a very, very authentic way, which isn't always easy. Superman is goodness personified to a cartoonish level, yet Smallville's Clark, while still staying true to this, never comes across as anything other than real. Tom Welling wasn't an experienced actor when he began on the show that would wind up giving him a decade worth of experience, but you could hardly tell. I think in some instances, his inexperience might have added to Clark's authenticity, with both the actor and the character being unsure of what it was they were doing, but still trying to make the best of it. Nonetheless, he handled the material like a champ. He's earnest, he's honest, even when he's advised not to be by the proverbial devil on his shoulder, Lex Luthor. In the rare instance that he makes the wrong decision, you see his character own up to it and try to make it right after the fact, whether that means correcting something or simply taking a backseat to his peers, which winds up happening a lot. More often than not, Clark misses out on what should be pretty important moments in his young life, spending his time looking out for others instead of looking out for himself, showing that even when he isn't a superhero, he's still always acted like one. Which is why I have always said, and will continue to say, that Tom Welling is one of my favorite Supermans. Sure, you could say that he only ever played Clark Kent, but he played Clark Kent prior to him making his real identity his secret identity. He's not some bumbling buffoon. For the most part. He's someone who constantly puts the needs of others before his own. A guy who misses out on the dance at homecoming because he's too busy trying to ensure that there's a homecoming to go to. The show might not have called him Superman, but I still do.
I'm Clark Kent. You're in Smallville. That's him. That's Superman.
If I had to use one word to describe him, I think it would be generally likable. I mean, I guess that's technically two, but it's still true. Clark is just such an easy character to root for. You want to see him succeed. You want to see him save the day and get the girl. But it seems like saving the day actually stops him from getting the girl more often than not. Clark's seemingly never-ending sacrifices stem from a very moral upbringing. His parents are pivotal to his person. You can clearly see their teachings in each and every one of his actions. And I love this because it shows that Superman wasn't born a perfect person. He was guided by two very loving and very caring people who did everything they could to instill positive values into him. His squeaky clean temperament and pleasant disposition are a product of nurture, not nature. Or they're a part of his nature because of nurture. And speaking of his parents, Smallville's Jonathan and Martha Kent are the parents that everyone wishes they had. They're warm, they're welcoming to anyone who doesn't have the last name Luthor. They're kind, they're caring, they're considerate. Sure, they could be a little overbearing at times, but you know that no matter what it is that they do, they have their son's best interest in mind. They truly are unsung heroes, as their words of wisdom are what helps their son become the hero that he's destined to be. They may not always have the answers, but they're always doing their best to find them. Jonathan is always encouraging his son to think of others and to use his powers for good. That is, when he is encouraging him to use his powers at all, because a lot of the time, not so much. Though he doesn't seem to mind when he's helping around the farm. I'm just saying, a little hypocritical. These two have a great sense of empathy. And by extension, so does Clark.
Eric didn't get my two strongest gifts. You and Mom.
Their relationship and their family life is incredibly endearing. Also showing just how important upbringing can be is the case of Lionel and Lex. A father and son who act more like enemies than the next of kin. You kinda can't mention one without the other because their characters and characterization is so heavily affected by the other. And I gotta tell you, in terms of Lex Luthor's, this is, without a doubt, the definitive take on the character. This was as good as we've ever gotten, and I'm pretty sure as good as we'll ever get. While like most good bad guys, the character's rooted in villainy.
What the hell are good villains?
But Smallville's Lex feels like a real person. Less a caricature, and more of a three-dimensional character.
I made sure I wasn't going to play the typical, stereotypical Lex Luthor. I wanted to do someone that was, I wanted to reinvent the character.
While he carries a darkness to him, he hasn't fully turned to the dark side just yet. He's a man at odds with his own nature, fighting off what will inevitably be the inevitable. Lex isn't the villain he'll someday be, but he is on the path to becoming that man. And he is guided down that path by his own father, Lionel Luthor, who is one of the many original additions to the Superman story I mentioned earlier. What I find most interesting is that Lex's empathy is almost a rebellion of his father and his cutthroat tactics. Lex isn't beyond kindness by any means. He looks out for those he takes a liking to. But his need to go against the grain and go out of his way for others is the antithesis of his father's teachings. Contributing greatly to this family feud is the fact that many refuse to see Lex as anything other than an extension of Lionel. Their relationship is so dysfunctional and so hostile that it seems like neither man really know where they stand with the other. And honestly, as an avid viewer, even I'm lost at times.
You're not my enemy. You're my son. I never saw the distinction.
Jerry Springer would have a field day with these two. One of this show's greatest tragedies, and there are a lot of them, is that in spite of everything he does to change the contrary, Lex is predestined to end up as a carbon copy of the man that he loathes. Try as he might to fight it, infamy will be his legacy. Despite all of his good deeds and attempts to help others, most will only see him as Lionel Luthor Jr., believing in this case that the sins of the father fall upon the son. Pete Ross, who barely ever shares a screen with Lex, lets his disliking for him and his family known any chance that he gets. Jonathan Kent, a man who is able to accept an alien baby as his own son, has a hard time shaking hands with the younger Luthor. And that's in spite of Lex constantly trying to earn his respect and help his family out where he can.
You see, I don't like Lex Luthor. I don't like Lionel Luthor, and I don't like your friendship with my son.
I know you don't believe me, but I genuinely want to help you. When you change your mind, my offer still stands.
Jonathan doesn't like looking at Lex, let alone having to acknowledge him. Still, by the end of the season, it seems like Lex has won over the head of the Kent family table. And while this is a pleasant moment, it wasn't one with long-lasting ramifications, as for the most part their relationship factory resets right after this. Something that I want to point out is that a lot of people talk about how good of a guy Lex was early on, and that's true to some degree, but it also really isn't, because while Lex is presenting himself as a good guy, and on occasion actually lives up to that title, a lot of his good deeds are either smokescreens or ruses. He's constantly playing mental chess with all those he comes across, whether they know they're playing or not. He's manipulative, and his loyalty is temporary at best. Throughout his friendship with Clark, he has him investigated, desperately trying to figure out his secret and even trying to confront him on it a couple times. Mind you, he only becomes suspicious of Clark after he saves his life. So his payment for not letting a man drown is to have that same man constantly challenge him and expose his deepest secret. While there was an actual bond between these two, there were still hostilities from the start, even if they were one-sided. Although I guess technically speaking, they for the most part always will be. Michael Rosenbaum approached the character with such charisma and charm that it made the character likable in spite of itself. He becomes a character that you want to see succeed for his own story, but one you hope doesn't for the sake of everyone else's. I should also note that Michael Rosenbaum was actually cast only a week before production began, and Lex Luthor isn't the only DC role he'd play, as he was also the voice of the Flash on the animated Justice League show. My understanding is that the role of Lionel Luthor was supposed to be a one-off appearance, but John Glover gave the character such flair that they were sort of forced to bring him back and have him play more of a role, and the show benefited greatly from that. He comes off as such a natural heel. Lionel is a well-educated, well-articulated, power-hungry billionaire who puts his own needs before everyone else's. That's if he ever gets around to thinking of anyone else's. Having little to no concern for anyone around him, not even those in his gene pool. There is seemingly no depth to which this man won't sink to, in the name of victory.
You know what I like, again, is this father-son dynamic. Does he even care about his son? Does he even, and them always one-upping each other?
What I love is the microcosms of Lionel in Lex, and the sentiments from the Kents that play through Clark. You can't help but wonder if Lex would have fared better with a family like the Kents. Or if Clark would be as noble should he not have had his parents' guidance. And I think on some level, having been exposed to the farm family's family values, Lex at times wonders that too. These parents have a profound effect on their children, literally shaping them into the people that they're destined to become.
The show tells you what it is in a weird way, and obviously it was puberty with superpowers.
So it's sort of puberty with superpowers.
Puberty with superpowers.
But it was also a show about extreme parenting.
We find out why he makes good choices later on in life. He didn't land here and decide, I'm going to do the right thing. I know always what the right thing is.
Where do you get these ideas of how to be a good person or the right thing? And that all comes from Clark's parents. If he landed a cornfield over and was found by Lionel Luthor, he would grow up with a whole different set of values and morals.
Lana Lang is the girl next door. Or, in this case, the girl across the street. Despite radiating wallflower energy, she's still one of the most popular girls in school. The head cheerleader dating the quarterback. It's a cliche, but it's a tried and true trope for a reason. She's a good-natured sweetheart, and perfectly matches Clark's too-good-to-be-real vibe. There's just something so sweet and sincere about these two sharing a screen together. They make for a what-if that you hope does. You want to root for them even when the odds are against them. And they always are. Despite their clear mutual feelings and obvious chemistry, these two lovebirds have to settle for just friends, as a series of obstacles stand in their way of being together. The first one being Whitney Fordman, Lana's boyfriend, and another original character made for the series. A character who really only exists to serve as a roadblock to Clark and Lana. Because of this, he ends up being an antagonist just because Clark is a protagonist. At first, he's an angry jerk, but one who's actually always good to Lana and seemed to really love her.
She does see something in him that everyone else doesn't. And the creators, the producers, and the writers haven't really shown that side of him very much. But it's there, really, it is.
But unfortunately for him, he's not the main character. So their relationship is just filled with flirtations between his girlfriend and Superboy. And when he's upset by this, he is somehow in the wrong. Look, I'm not saying I agree with all of his actions, I'm just saying I understand them. Eventually, Lana decides that she doesn't want to be with Whitney anymore. But just as she's about to break up with him, his father gets sick. And following his passing, Whitney decides to enlist in the Marines in his memory. The character seems to change over time, and it seems like less of a development and more of a sudden retcon. After the jealous boyfriend shtick gets old, his animosity just dissipates halfway through the season, and you learn that all in all, abducting Clark and hanging him out in a cornfield shirtless on a cold night aside, he's a pretty good guy.
And he's a very sweet and sensitive guy. You just don't get to see that because he's kind of got a gruff exterior.
By the end of the first season, the show almost has you rooting for a character that you started off hating. And just as it seems like he's finally about to play a bigger part, he leaves Smallville for the Army. Poor guy didn't really get to do all that much, but he definitely made more of an impact in his final days on the show than he did in his first few.
Do you think Clark will ever get your girl?
I hope not. Jeez, I hope not. Then where would I be?
Like with Clark and Lex, Lana's relationship with her parents is equally important to understanding her character. Having become an orphan at a very early age, Lana spends the rest of her early years doing whatever she can to feel close to her lost mother and father. She goes into business with Lex Luthor to take over the Talon, because it's the very place where her parents first met. She spends all of her time romanticizing them and their relationship and their parenting, when, realistically, as time would tell, she knows very little about them. Yet she carries a piece of them with her wherever she goes, almost somewhat literally, wearing a fragment of the meteor that took their lives around her neck. The meteorite that will someday soon be classified as Kryptonite makes Clark sick if he gets too close, creating a physical barrier between him and the girl of his dreams. A situation that definitely symbolizes their whole relationship, because Clark can't get too close to Lana without somebody getting hurt. Eventually, Clark convinces Lana to keep her necklace in a lead box that Lex gave him, both keeping her memory safe and keep himself safe from them. But even after the green rock is put away, despite being drawn to each other, the two are still constantly being pulled apart. They're like two magnets just facing in the opposite direction. The only other original series lead came in Chloe Sullivan, Clark's longtime friend who harbors a not-so-secret crush on him. While she was made for the show, she did share a bit in common with another famous Superman character, sort of acting as Smallville's equivalent to Lois Lane originally. I don't know if she was intended to be the answer to that, but it sure seemed like it at first. I mean, you have a female reporter whose passion for the job often leans more toward obsession, and seems to have a thing for Clark Kent/Superman. However, that aside, similarities end there. Chloe's a bubbly, upbeat, aspiring journalist that wears her heart on her sleeve. Unfortunately for her, that means it gets broken a lot. Sometimes by the same person. Continually. And while her feelings are no secret to anyone else, Clark is still mostly oblivious somehow. And when he is made aware, it doesn't seem to change anything, as he only sees her as a friend. In spite of this, last minute toward the end of the season, the two try to test the waters, but their romance doesn't seem to be built to last. Chloe's major contribution to the show is her wall of weird, where she spent documenting and detailing the absolutely insane events that take place in the small town. It feels kind of weird to say something positive about this particular person for obvious reasons, but Allison Mack really brought this character to life, and she made a completely made-up new character feel not only at home in a Superman story, but almost integral to it. Pete Ross is really the odd man out here. More often than not, he doesn't factor into most stories in a major way. Earlier on, he's given the background of B-plots and acting as a spectator to the A-plots. There's nothing wrong with the character, but there's also nothing for the character. It just kind of seems like Pete is really just there to support Clark at any and every given moment. He gets maybe one storyline this season, and it's him not liking Lex, as there's been bad blood between his family and Lex's family, with Luthor Corp shutting down his father's farm. And he's also apparently jealous of how close Clark and he are. Alright. I mean this in the nicest way possible, but Pete is easily the most expendable part of the show. We're 21 episodes in, and I have next to nothing to say about this character. Pete might not have had much of a presence, but I think the fact that he had any at all had a lot to do with the actor playing him. All things considered, Sam Jones III did a lot with a little. Season 1 also saw the start of a few reoccurring roles as well. There's Aunt Nell, Lana's current caretaker, following her parents' untimely demise in the pilot. She comes off as a very supportive motherly figure, but one who doesn't necessarily always know what to do in every given instance, at times lying and hiding things from Lana in an effort to protect her. She doesn't get a whole lot of screen time, but I think what they do with her, they do well. You can tell that she genuinely loves her niece and would do anything for her, but you can also tell that this was a role that she didn't really see herself in, not intending to take care of a child, but sort of being thrust into that situation. So now she's stuck dealing with these growing pains, watching as her niece grows up. Being that her anchor into the series is Lana herself, she doesn't really get a whole lot of time to interact with a lot of the other characters. And the only other trait that she has besides being Lana's loving aunt is being Clark's adoptive father's ex-girlfriend. Not that that really plays into any of the plots or dynamics, that's just something that gets brought up once or twice. You have Sheriff Ethan, who begins to feel a little bit like Pat Hingle's Commissioner Gordon, in the sense that he's always there, he's always at the scene of the crime, but that's just about it. You don't really get to see him do a lot of anything. He doesn't really affect any of the narratives, but he is present. To be fair, it's not a show about the Smallville PD, it's a show about young Superman, so really what do you expect? And you have Principal Kwan, who would not make it all the way through the end of the season. Sorry for the spoiler. Otherwise, most of these returning characters are Lex and Lionel's underlings. You have Sean Connery's son Jason playing Lionel Luthor's assistant, Dominic, a man who is cocky to a fault, who is a constant pain to Lex. A lot of his problems with Lex feel a little more personal than your standard business backstabbing.
By the way, Dominic, tell your sister I said hi.
On behalf of Lionel, Dominic is sent to investigate Lex, and in turn he winds up becoming one of the many pawns passed back and forth in their never-ending game of chess. In the end, I'm not sure which of the Luthors win this game, but Dominic definitely loses. Equally shady is Sam Phelan, who's a corrupt cop on the Luthor payroll, one of many, I would imagine. The man who managed to cover up Lex Luthor's involvement with a murder case in Metropolis. Of course, the character later comes into play when he shows up in Smallville. The town, not the show. After witnessing Clark's good deeds, he decides to put him up for some bad tasks, threatening to expose the Kryptonian should he not do as he says. Ultimately, he's outsmarted by Clark not once, but twice, using one of his less bragged about powers, his intelligence. In a very similar vein was the character of Roger Nixon, someone who aligned himself with the Luthors for a time being. Someone who also looked to take down Clark after he learned of his power. Nixon was your typical self-centered sleazeball that just wanted to expose Clark for his own financial gain. And the only reason Lex still hasn't officially figured out Clark's secret yet is because there's no honor amongst thieves. Still, that's not to say that Lex isn't suspicious. He's very much on Clark's tail this whole time. But in my opinion, for my money, the most memorable Lex-related goon has to be Dr. Hamilton, a Meteor-obsessed defamed scientist. Ironically, it's actually him who's first referred to as a Meteor freak way before that phrase would be coined toward the people that were genetically altered due to the meteor shower. Admittedly, this character is a bit of a plot device and exposition machine, but Joe Morton still gets a performance out of it. The character appears for all of 3 times this season, but for whatever reason, he was a character that always stuck out to me. Probably because of the actor playing him. Unfortunately, all of these characters are short-lived, as after they make their entrance, they're almost immediately shown the exit. Still, they all had a purpose to serve on the show, and once they've served that purpose, they're moved on from. This season of the show also emphasized the star in guest star. Early Smallville made one-off, made-for-TV characters feel just as important as the someday Superman, which I think was sort of toned down a little bit as time went on. I mean, there was definitely still plenty of guest stars after this, a lot of which were pretty memorable, but I don't think that they ever shared the spotlight the way the guest stars of the first season did. Lizzie Kaplan plays Tina, Lana's classmate who is absolutely obsessed with her. Tina can't figure out if she wants to be with Lana or she wants to be Lana, but unfortunately she has the ability to be should she want to be. Due to a surgery that the meteorites somehow affected, she can morph and change her appearance at will. To make matters worse, she's moody and manipulative, which isn't an ideal combination. But still, in spite of her not-so-temporary insanity, she's very strategic. She sets up and gets one over on a lot of the main cast, actually. It's a case of great power in the wrong hands. She makes for a scary antagonist, and her episode is definitely one of the most unsettling episodes of the early days of the show. Not far behind her is Adam Brody playing Justin Gaines, a hopeful artist who has his hands injured in a hit-and-run accident. However, he's granted the gift of telekinesis, and he uses these newfound abilities to try to hunt down whom he believes is responsible for his accident. Which sort of makes me wonder why, because it's shown that he's fully capable of still accomplishing his dreams utilizing this brand new gift, but I guess he just has his heart set on killing his principal. It was always really funny for me seeing him on this series, because I remember on the show The OC, he played a nerd obsessed with all things DC.
The guy's like Superman. He's not Superman. He's like thoroughbred. I'm a monkey with symbols.
So I think it's fitting that he ended up here. And then also years later in the Shazam movies. Tony Todd of Candyman fame played Earl, a former Luthor Corp employee and farmhand of the Kents. Following an explosion at Luthor Corp while they'd been experimenting on meteor rocks, Earl starts getting the shakes. Shakes that would go on to nearly quake the earth around him. An event that eventually ruined his life, leading to him losing his job and having to leave his family in fear of their safety. To make matters worse, the whole incident and even the floor of the plant he worked on were completely covered up, and instead Earl was treated like a madman. This is a really heartbreaking performance for a character who wouldn't make so much as a second appearance. This one just sticks with you. Dan Lauria played Coach Walt. He was the hothead from the episode Hothead. Walt was an overly dedicated high school football coach whose life centered around his career. Through anger and aggression, he led the Crows to several victories for decades, including Jonathan Kent in his class. But his anger gets the best of him, and his fiery personality becomes too much to bear when it's literal. Personally, I always felt that this was perfectly cast. I wouldn't say this is one of my favorite episodes, but I still think it's a really fun one. Let's move on from fire to ice, as X-Men's Iceman, Shawn Ashmore, plays Clark's classmate Eric Summers. He starts off as a normal, nerdy teen, but through mystical osmosis somehow gains Clark's abilities. After gaining Clark's powers, Eric shows off, showcasing what life might look like for Clark if he was open and honest about what he could do. And at first, it seems largely positive. He's heralded as a hero, the girl he's interested in seems to suddenly take interest in him. Unfortunately, the good times don't last, and Eric is shown to wield these abilities with zero responsibility, acting out in revenge as opposed to justice, bullying his bully, rebelling against his parents through force. Not only does this episode show how dangerous these powers could be in the wrong hands, but it also shows how dangerous it is to confide in somebody about these powers, as Eric's parents do not react properly to his newfound changes. The role of Ryan was played by an actor named Ryan. He's a boy with the ability to read minds, but his stepfather and new girlfriend turn him into a weapon and an accessory for their crimes. After assisting in a bunch of robberies and other criminal activity, Ryan escapes as the crimes turn violent, taking refuge at the Kent farm, where he finds comfort in Clark and his family. Realizing his abilities don't work on Clark for some reason, he eventually uncovers his secret, and promises to keep it as such. For his short stay on the show, he works as Soup's pseudo-little brother. And in a way, the first real person to see Clark for what he truly is. A hero.
You're safe now.
As even without the cape, Ryan still sees him as such. In the episode Hourglass, Clark befriends an elderly woman that can't see, but can still see the future. It sounds a little goofy, and I guess it is, but it's actually very endearing. The fortune teller Cassandra shows Clark a grim future, one that sees him surviving far past his friends and family's expiration dates. Cassandra tells him that somebody close to him will die soon, only for that someone foreshadowed to be her herself, dying of a heart attack as she witnesses Lex's equally grim future. This same episode also sees Eric Christian Olsen acts as a killer who has re-gifted his youth. I don't really have a whole lot to add to that, but I think it was worth mentioning nonetheless. The point I'm trying to make here is that the one-offs felt just as important to the plot as its main players. And I think that made for a really interesting viewing. There's just a certain unpredictability that comes with Smallville. You never know where the show's gonna go, and you never know how it's gonna get there. And I think that's what makes even a rewatch of the series refreshing, because you're not getting the same exact experience every episode. Well, outside of Clark and Lana, that is. For what ultimately is the Superman version of Dawson's Creek, the show went to some pretty dark places in its first couple episodes. A crooked cop abducting Chloe and burying her alive? Little Lana witnessing her parents burned to a crisp at an early age? Chloe getting thrown out a window? Lex being involved in a murder cover-up? Clark's father being arrested for a crime that he didn't commit? This is a show that supposedly follows high school students in a small town. And in spite of that, Smallville goes there.
Here I thought you got kicked out of Metropolis University for Meteor theories, but apparently it was your student-teacher relations. I wonder if the Smallville police had you registered.
I ask you now to pronounce judgment on those accused.
You're sucked into the comfort of family life and high school drama, and then bam! Funeral scene in the rain. The show is, without question, a product of its time. From the particular song choices in each episode, to the effects looking very Matrixy, it isn't hard to tell what time period this was made in when you first watch it. But I say none of that insultingly, because it all works. One thing I will always give this show credit for, even in the seasons that I wasn't exactly crazy about, and we'll get to those. Possibly. But the show had an incredible sense of continuity. And it would manage to make small things like the exchanging of a lead box feel monumental. Just everything that happened in the show meant something. It was all building towards something. And you can never really tell for sure what it was they were building to until they got there. But for the most part, you enjoyed the ride. Obviously, one of the most iconic things about this show is its opening theme. People who know nothing about Smallville can still quote a verse or two. The theme fit the overall theme of the show, and I think it really helped give Smallville its own distinct identity. And Remy Zero, the band that performs the song, actually appear in the finale as themselves, in which they perform the show's opening theme, which is wildly meta for a time when that wasn't exactly the in thing to do. When it comes to Smallville, even the minute details are kind of fascinating. Even the show's window dressing is noteworthy. Even the fictional newspaper that Chloe and Clark work for is named after the non-fictional school newspaper that Superman creators Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster worked for when they were younger, The Torch. Smallville played with a lot of foreshadowing, and I mean a lot. I'm not just talking about multiple episodes, I'm talking about multiple times in each and every episode. Sometimes it does it subtly, or at the very least, not egregiously. The future presents itself in all different forms on the show. For one, on more than one occasion, Clark is shown to look like Superman. Sure, he may not have the cape, but he definitely has the colors. More often than not, you will see this character donning red and blue clothing much like his comic counterpart. And these looks in of themselves kind of became iconic in their own right. Yeah, he wasn't wearing the spandex, but at least this was a nice nod and acknowledgement. And for similar reasons, you can also spot Lex wearing shades of purple throughout the show's run. Much more surprising are the brief mentions of Green Arrow and the Flash this early on, serving as pretty early laid groundwork for future appearances of the characters. But we'll get into that eventually. Perhaps. But that's far from the only nod that this season gives. The inevitable comes up a lot in the dialogue.
Nietzsche. So what are you? Man or Superman?
I haven't figured it out yet. They say the design symbolizes strength and courage.
Can't exactly see myself going into battle with that on my chest.
So, who came up with Superboy?
I did.
I like that.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of lame.
I don't remember asking you. Clark Kent, Man of Tomorrow. Kind of presumptuous, don't you think?
I like it. Clark, do you believe a man can fly? I wanted you to have something.
A sword?
It's a foil, Clark. Every hero should have one.
I didn't know you liked comic books.
A strange visitor from another planet who protects the weak. When I was young, he was my idol, not to mention the fact he's bald.
That's the thing about Clark Kent. He's not always there when you want him, but he's always there when you need him.
I'm not destined to be a politician. You need two different personalities.
You don't need to be an elected official to change the world, Clark.
Have you ever thought about getting into politics?
Someday I'd like to be president.
Clark Kent, investigative reporter. Has a nice ring to it.
We're friends, right?
Yeah, last time I checked. It's still strange to think he and Rickman were once best friends.
You do whatever you want with the rest of the world, but when it comes to this town, you leave it alone. You've been warned.
Think we'll ever end up like that?
Trust me, Clark. Our friendship is going to be the stuff of legend.
Don't even get me started with that angel statue at the cemetery Clark always seems to be standing nearby. Yeah, I get it. He comes from above and he's here to save us. He's like an angel. Yep. I see what you're doing. You're doing it too much. The soundtrack in general was pretty foreshadowing. Even the soundtrack was foreshadowing, with both Enrique Iglesias' Hero and Superman by Fighting for Five getting play. For all that I've shown, I still didn't include all of the show's passing preludes. There's actually a lot more, but these were some of my most and least favorite. For the most part, I think they're meant to be a wink and a nod at the audience, because it's hard to imagine that any of these Easter eggs have any real bearing on the character's future. Sorry, I just can't imagine the Warrior Plate somehow inspiring his supersuit. That seems more like a coincidence than anything else. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that I kinda wish that some of these references held a little bit more weight in the long run. I still enjoy them nevertheless, but I think it would have made for a better narrative device and probably greater storytelling if every one of these Easter eggs, every one of these references to what one day will be, were in actuality the grounding for why those things happened. Somebody refers to him as the Man of Tomorrow in the past. That's something he keeps in the back of his head and utilizes in the future. Maybe it's said to him by somebody who's important to him, somebody that he holds dearly, and that's why it's a big deal. I don't know. My point is, I wish a lot of these references were more than just references for the sake of the audience. I wish they were story beats for the character's arc. I just want to pause the video real quick for no reason in particular. Don't worry, this is not an ad break. But I just want to thank y'all for watching this far. This has definitely been the toughest video I've ever had to make. I've put more work into this than I think any other video ever made on this channel, which is really saying something at this point in time. But unfortunately, I think it's more than likely most won't watch this all the way through. But feel free to prove me wrong in the comment section below. If you're still watching this video, which I hope that you are, let me know by using a pun with the word super in it. Smallville paid tribute to the Supermans of the big and small screen before. Annette O'Toole, who played Clark's adoptive mother, previously played Lana Lang in Superman 3, and might have just been the one redeeming factor of that entire movie. Although, funnily enough, she wasn't actually the first choice, as the pilot was previously shot with another actress in the role.
Martha, what a surprise.
Do you want to make a wish?
I would love to make a wish.
Okay, abracadabra.
I see that little face. It's all I ever wanted.
I see a little face. It's all I ever wanted.
But he must have parents.
Well, if he does, they're definitely not from Kansas.
Well, if he does, they're definitely not from Kansas.
We're gonna tell people we found him out in the field.
We didn't find him. He found us.
We didn't find him. He found us.
It tastes better out of the bottle.
Where did you learn your manners?
On a farm. Tastes better out of the bottle.
Where'd you learn your manners?
On a farm.
No offense to that actress, I think things worked out for the better. She certainly didn't have the same chemistry with John Schneider, to say the least. It's hard to imagine how considerably different things would have been had she stayed in the role. Because for a lot of Superman fans, still to this day, when they think about the Kents, it's actually a Ned O'Toole and John Schneider that they think of. I know I do. The season would also showcase a couple of actors who would later pop back up in other Superman media. Kwesi Amie, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering that name, played Lex Luthor's security guard Darius. He'd also later go on to play an airman in Man of Steel. And Michael Rosenbaum, the show's Lex Luthor, would go on to play one of Lex Luthor's Raptors in the 2025 Superman movie. But obviously, most notably, future Lois Lane Amy Adams appears in this season in what's admittedly a pretty poor episode, all things considered. Her performance definitely elevates it, but the story itself is kinda lacking. Now, these castings weren't references at the time, but with hindsight, I think it's interesting to see that there's a little shared behind-the-scenes Superman history here. Speaking of shared history, the Luthor mansion used in this series may look familiar to some other superhero fans, as it's the same mansion used as Xavier's School for the Gifted in the X-Men movies, as well as Oliver Queen's place in Arrow. The sound used for Kryptonite in Smallville actually originated on the previous Superman series, The Adventures of Lois and Clark.
To Superman.
And whether this was done to be lazy or because the producers were feeling nostalgic, regardless, I think it works well. Overall, I think what made Smallville so successful was that it was very evidently a labor of love, strategically put together by two men who had a vision for the man before he became super. There is so much to love about this show and this season of the show that it's hard to know where to begin, which isn't always the norm for shows in their infancy. Yet from day one, there was always something special about Smallville. Now that's not to say that everything in the show is perfect, nor everything in the season. There are a few things that you kinda need to turn your brain off and overlook. Like, for example, Lex being in his 20s, spending all his time hanging out with a freshman in high school. Yeah, it's kind of a weird look.
Get out! Get out now!
I'm not gonna say that it's, like, perverted or anything, but it is estranged to say the least. Yet the show doesn't really call too much attention to that. More often than not, Clark and Lex are mostly portrayed as equals, so it's easy to forget the age difference as it's mostly a non-factor for some reason. But the more thought you put into it, the weirder it feels, especially given future events that we'll get into eventually. Maybe. Everyone's driving cars, Lana owns her own business, Whitney joins the army. Yeah, the show for the most part just treats the characters like they're the age of the actors. So again, you kind of just gotta go with the flow when it comes to stuff like that. The characters can also overreact at times, and treat each other pretty unfairly. Chloe's chronic meltdowns and Lana's lapses in logic on all things Clark can get more than a little bit annoying, especially if you're binge-watching the series. But I think for the most part that they make sense when taking the character's actual age into account. Once again, in spite of the actors never really coming across as their character's age. Now this may be a controversial take, but for as many classic episodes as this season has, there are also some pretty big stinkers. Some of the initial Meteor freaks were a little lackluster, to say the least. Spider Stalker, B-Girl, Skinny Fat. Yeah, I can't see them joining Superman's official rogues gallery anytime soon. At least I hope they don't. These aren't great, and I think that's why most of them did not come back. And all of them did not come back in any major capacity.
People a lot of times would say, Freak of the Week. Why is it such a Freak of the Week? And there are a lot of those episodes. When you're writing 22 episodes a year, you have to have a Freak of the Week. I think as the show progresses into seasons 2 and seasons 3, we start to see more character development and less freak of the week.
Sometimes certain characters can come off a little repetitive at times. There comes a time when Lana's one personality trait is that her parents are dead. Her motivation for everything that she does in life is that she has dead parents.
They're dead, Lana. They're not coming back, Lana. Deal with it.
I like the character and all, and I think Kristen Cruick really made her memorable, but sometimes it can feel like I'm playing a broken record, or watching a rerun. Although I guess technically I am. Likewise, the same can be said about the characters' interactions with Clark. Lana and Clark, while downright adorable, can also be downright annoying. Their interactions are cute, but if you've seen their first few scenes, then you've seen all of their scenes for the first season. Now, earlier I said that you weren't getting the same experience in every episode of Smallville, and that's true, for the most part, because sometimes you were. The episodes do feel a little repetitive from time to time. Take, for example, episode 5. It's an episode that sees Chloe become interested in a boy who becomes infected by the meteorite and winds up trying to take her life force. And then just 2 episodes later, we see Pete become interested in a girl who becomes infected by the meteorite and winds up trying to take his life force. And if I'm being honest, it wasn't so fun the first time that it needed to be recycled verbatim so shortly thereafter. And then by episode 19, Chloe becomes interested in another boy who is infected by the meteorite, and this time just tries to straight up kill everyone. Spider-Boy and Iceman Hold the Ice get their powers and immediately take a liking to wearing coats and making passes at the girls they like in front of their boyfriends. That is so oddly specific. So, from time to time, it does feel a little copy and paste. Still, I respect the risks that they took in between episodes like this, and I think those make a way stronger impression. And yet, despite all of this, I would still say that each and every episode was almost must-see. Because this is the interesting thing about Smallville. There were always 2 stories being told with each episode. And I'm not just talking about A and B plots. I'm talking about the narrative of the episode, and the narrative of the season playing through the episodes. So while the individual stories could be a little lacking at times, the overall story playing out in the background never once stopped being entertaining. So even when you have an episode that doesn't necessarily work, there are still plenty of parts of that episode that did. Sometimes parts of it that are integral to understanding the deeper plot. By skipping so much as one episode, you're missing out on major parts of the overall story. The episodes where we're watching a one-off Freak of the Week get their comeuppance may seem a little tedious at times, but it's what's happening in the background that's really important. Clark and Lex's developing friendship, Clark and Lana's growing feelings, Whitney and Lana's relationship problems, Lionel Luthor trying to test his son and best his son, Jonathan and Martha desperately trying to protect theirs. So even when the show was bad, it was still good. If you weren't tuning in, you were missing out. Though another issue I had with some of the episodes is that too many times the problems just solve themselves. Like when the guy with the death touch just claps his hands together at the end of the episode and dies. Oh, good. Well, I'm glad that's settled. Or when B-Girl's hive just randomly turns on her to end the episode. Oh, okay, that's the end of that, I guess. I also think that some episodes were a little bit too goofy for their own good, which is totally acceptable in an early season of a show that's just finding its footing. I mean, Whitney joining a bunch of ex-jocks turned bank robbers using kryptonite tattoos? What was the sentence that even just came out of my mouth?
It's all about these people being inhaling the pollen of this special kryptonite-infected flower. I can't believe I just said all that.
She lost all that weight by drinking juice from vegetables grown in the soil in her greenhouse.
It must have done something to her metabolism. She's losing weight too fast to keep up with regular food.
And that's why she needs body fat.
Exactly.
Even for this show, that doesn't work. I mean, if this was Superboy, maybe. Actually, that might be an edgy storyline for that show. But on Smallville? Yeah, I don't know. There's a common trope of creepy behavior being endearing as long as it's coming from the main character. And I'm here to tell you, it's still creepy. Think back to Amazing Spider-Man, where in the first movie, Peter is literally taking pictures of a girl that he barely knows from a distance, putting them up everywhere he can in his room. Or take the second movie, where after they break up, he literally takes to stalking her. We obviously know the lead, and we know that it's innocent, he doesn't mean anything by it, he's not a bad guy, he's not gonna do anything terrible, but that doesn't mean it's still not odd behavior, or just overall off-putting. Sure, Clark doesn't mean any harm, but that doesn't change the fact that he shouldn't constantly be watching Lana through a telescope. You know, he's a good guy, but that's not a good thing to do. To make matters worse, the show gets real hypocritical, because after they show him doing that in the first episode and it's played for Oz, the very next episode sees something similar with a different character, and now it's depicted as being a bad thing, because he's not the main character. Yeah, it's bad this time because he's recording her. No, it's all bad. It's all bad. None of it's good. While the acting was usually stellar, it could also at times be less than stellar, mostly due to the circumstances and situation of the stories being at odds with the time slot. For example, in real life, in the case of death, mourning a loved one takes time. But when you only have 43 minutes to tell a story, well, that time needs to be sped up, making the whole grieving process a matter of moments, if not minutes. And that's just an example. However, it can lead to actors drastically underacting, and more importantly, underreacting to what should otherwise be life-changing or mortifying moments. Case in point, the scene that is lived on in infamy on Talkville.
And the body's there, and Pete goes,
Whoa, who's that?
It was like, that's the reactions?
Yeah, that's certainly a choice. One of the biggest complaints I have of the show early on is that it at times can feel foreign to fans. A lot of this season is new additions over adaptations, especially when it goes for bad guys. I'm not saying you have to bring in a major villain every week, but, you know, once or twice a season I think would be more than acceptable. Lex notwithstanding, because obviously that's a slow burn and he's making his way up to villainy. It's actually surprising that not more is done with the characters from the comics here. Narratively it makes sense, but in execution, it can feel like a little bit of a letdown. However, to its credit, this didn't damage its credibility, because Smallville survived off good performances from an ensemble cast with great chemistry. I think the worst thing that the first season of the show did was go out the way that it did. Its season finale is a part one of a two-part event, meaning that it's all build-up just to get to a to-be-continued. A to-be-continued when the stakes couldn't be any higher. Jonathan Kent running after the man who's threatening to expose his son? Clark leaving Chloe at the dance to save Lana in the middle of a hurricane? I'm not saying you can't leave on a cliffhanger. You want to maybe tie up some of these stories? For me, a good cliffhanger has a solution to whatever the problem from the plot was, but the conclusion comes with a consequence, and the consequence is the cliffhanger. This was not that. It was just, here is one half of a story, and if you want the rest, I'll see you in a year, sucker. It's part one of a two-part story, with part two being the season 2 opener. And in my opinion, that just doesn't work. A finale should still have some sense of finality to it, at least in some way, shape, or form. I mean, it's in the name. This is the opposite, as the payoff of the entire plot wouldn't come through until the show's next season premiere. The content wasn't the problem, where they decided to cut it was. The season 1 finale and the season 2 opener should really be watched back to back, except you couldn't watch them back to back when they came out. I know I probably shouldn't be upset about this all these years later, but I'm a petty man, and I am. I'm sorry, you pull off an ending like that when you know you're coming back next week or next month for a follow-up. You're not waiting a full season in between. In my opinion, this finale is actually the first lowlight of the series. I could devote a whole video to that finale in of itself. I won't, but just know that I could. Let's just leave it at it's pretty bad and might just be one of the worst season finales I've ever seen on this channel, and that's saying something. Kryptonite is maybe the most inconsistent plot device I've ever seen. Because Kryptonite is anything and everything. Any of the time and all of the time. Whatever is convenient to the plot, that is what it does. It can turn you into a monster. It can make you younger for a few hours. It can give you electricity powers. It could take your powers away. It can do anything. The sky is the limit, and I'm not even covering half of it. Sometimes Clark can handle those infected by kryptonite with ease, but other times the kryptonite in their system affects Clark and makes it next to impossible for him to stop them.
He's infected by kryptonite-infected bugs. Shouldn't he be, like, vibrating kryptonite through his bloodstream?
But in that case, wouldn't it be everybody who's infected with kryptonite? So then you'd have trouble with everybody throughout the years?
Sometimes he can be near Lana when she has the necklace. Other times he has to keep his distance. And look, if we're trying to go for the scientific approach here, I think it stands to reason that if Clark is negatively affected by kryptonite, that he'd also be negatively impacted by those infected with it. But then again, it would also make it really hard to make episodes, so I do understand why they didn't do that all of the time, but the fact that they did that some of the time is strange enough, because now the whole thing just doesn't make sense. It's like the only thing for sure about kryptonite in Smallville is that there is nothing for sure about the kryptonite in Smallville. I actually almost feel bad calling out whatever blemishes this season had, because in the grand scheme of things, they pale in comparison to all the good that it's done. All the clever storytelling, all the perfect portrayals. All in all, while I wouldn't say Season 1 was the show at its very best, it was definitely on the right track. Smallville's first season was a strong first impression. It properly portrayed beloved characters from the Superman comics. It introduced interesting new additions to the lore. It reimagined parts of the mythos, and it carved out its own identity by doing so. Not every episode is a hit, but the ones that are really stick the landing. And even the not-so-good ones also have some more than memorable moments that make up for it. It's this season that hooked me back in 2001, and it still resonates with me today. You can't deny the impact that this show had on the mythos. Most Superman stories post-Smallville credit Lionel Luthor as the father of Lex, a character specifically made only for the pilot of this series. Chloe Sullivan has appeared in various comics over the years, and even got referenced in the show Supergirl, and was given a slight nod in the movie Man of Steel. Unfortunately, I think it's likely that this character will stop being referenced altogether now, due to her actress's controversy, which is a real shame because Chloe deserves better. Allison Mack, well, maybe not so much. Whitney Fordman was also referenced in Man of Steel, where the character was now renamed Whitney Fordham. Despite the name change, she still kept the same basic characterization, being Clark's high school rival with the Letterman jacket.
That's from Superman?
Smallville.
And these are just the things that were recycled from the first season of the show. There have been plenty more contributions as the show went on. But the fact that they took this much from this show this early on, I think is a real indicator that they had something here. In order to make this video, I decided to sit down and rewatch the first season of the show with my girlfriend, who had never seen the series before and was certain that she would hate it. She was crying by the end of the first episode. One of the funnest parts of making this video was watching her fall in love with the series. After the pilot, she was in hook, line, and sinker. We weren't 3 episodes in before she started making a Smallville playlist, and we weren't a full episode in before she decided that she wanted to marathon it with me. In the course of making this one video, it has become one of her all-time favorite shows. Lex is her favorite character, guess she has a type, and it is one of her favorite takes on Superman. And you know what? It's mine too. All in all, Smallville still hits, 20 years later. So with all that being said, that was Smallville's first season. And if you like this video and would maybe want to join me in journeying through the rest of the show, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
Oh, that's just Smallville for you, honey.
I am vengeance. I am the night. And that was V Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time, same bat channel.